What if the person you spend every moment with, the one staring back at you in the mirror, is the one you fear the most? Deep inside, there lies a hidden world of thoughts, emotions, and parts of yourself that you've been avoiding, sometimes without even realizing it. This avoidance isn't accidental. It's rooted in ancient psychological defenses designed to protect us from pain and discomfort. But what happens when those defenses keep us locked away from our true selves? Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, believed that this fear of facing ourselves is the root of much of human suffering. In this video, we'll explore why so many avoid the journey inward, what it means to confront the parts we hide, and how doing so can unlock a profound transformation, leading to freedom, wholeness, and a life lived authentically. Get ready to uncover the hidden forces that shape your behavior and learn how embracing the shadow can become your greatest source of strength. Most people go through life without ever truly facing themselves, not because they're lazy or unaware, but because it's terrifying. Deep self-examination is not just about understanding our strengths or ambitions, it's about digging into the darker corners of our mind. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche isn't a clean, polished mirror. It's more like a shattered one, with pieces hidden beneath layers of fear, denial, and illusion. When we begin to look inward, what we often find isn't comforting, it's confronting. Jung argued that the human mind naturally avoids what it does not want to accept. This includes past traumas, insecurities, jealousy, hatred, shame, and impulses we label as bad. We bury these parts in what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious side of our personality that contains everything we refuse to acknowledge. Facing ourselves means acknowledging that the darkness we see in others also lives within us. That's a deeply unsettling truth for most people. Imagine looking into a mirror that doesn't reflect the person you pretend to be, but the person you really are, complete with flaws, regrets, selfish desires, and unresolved pain. That mirror is the inner self. It's raw and honest, and for many, it's unbearable. We've been trained from childhood to fit in, to please others, to hide what makes us different. This training creates layers of false identities, what Jung called the persona, and we wear this mask every day in society. To take it off feels like death to the ego. But here's the paradox. Real growth only begins when we do take it off. Jung believed that we cannot become whole without encountering our own darkness. The process he called individuation, the journey towards self-realization, requires us to confront our shadow. And that confrontation is not a single moment, but a long, often painful process of peeling away the illusions we've built to protect ourselves. It's not just about knowing your good qualities, it's about owning your worst ones too. Still, fear gets in the way. The fear that if we face our anger, we'll become aggressive. If we face our sadness, we'll be overwhelmed. If we admit we're envious or manipulative, we'll be rejected. So instead, we project those traits onto others. We say, she's so arrogant or he's so fake, without realizing we're describing the parts of ourselves we can't accept. This is what Jung called projection, and it's one of the ways we unconsciously avoid facing who we really are. Our modern world doesn't help either. We live in a culture of distraction, endless scrolling, overwork, noise. Silence and solitude are avoided because they might bring us face to face with ourselves. Jung warned that this kind of avoidance leads to inner stagnation. When we refuse to look inward, our unconscious starts to take control in hidden ways, through anxiety, depression, toxic relationships, addictions, and more. These are the signs that the shadow is acting out because it's been ignored for too long. Ironically, what we fear most, facing ourselves, is also what can set us free. Jung didn't see the shadow as evil. He saw it as necessary. It contains not just our darkness, but also the parts of ourselves that have been suppressed. Creativity, power, passion, authenticity. To face the fear within is to reclaim those parts and become more whole. But it takes radical honesty, patience, and the courage to feel discomfort without running from it. Facing yourself isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming real. Most people never start this journey because it's uncomfortable, but those who do, who are willing to face the fear within, often discover a depth of peace, strength, and purpose that can't be found any other way. This is why self-confrontation feels terrifying. It threatens the identity we've built to feel safe. But if we want to grow, evolve, and live authentically, there's no other path. As Jung said, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. The fear is real, but so is the transformation on the other side. Carl Jung wasn't just a psychologist, he was a pioneer of the inner world. While many thinkers of his time focused on external behavior or societal norms, Jung dared to ask deeper questions. What lives inside us? What shapes our thoughts, dreams, and fears? His entire theory of human behavior is built on the belief that the human psyche is vast, complex, and mostly unconscious. In other words, most of who we are is hidden from our conscious mind. Jung saw the psyche as made up of three main parts: the conscious ego, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The conscious ego is what we usually think of as me, our thoughts, memories, and self-image. The personal unconscious holds everything we've experienced but repressed or forgotten. But what really set Jung apart was his idea of the collective unconscious, a deeper layer shared by all humans, filled with ancient patterns and symbols called archetypes. These are the building blocks of human experience, influencing us without us even realizing it. For Jung, understanding the inner world was not just about mental health, it was about becoming whole. He believed that every person has an inner drive toward growth, meaning, and self-realization. This journey inward was what he called individuation, the process of becoming your true self by integrating all parts of the psyche, including the shadow. But the road to individuation isn't easy, because most people are afraid of what they might find. Jung believed that the psyche naturally tries to maintain balance, like nature does. When we ignore parts of ourselves, like anger, pain, or hidden desires, those parts don't disappear. Instead, they sink into the unconscious and begin to influence us in indirect, often destructive ways. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of facing what's within us. He believed that the more we avoid certain feelings or truths, the more power they gain over us from the shadows. He also believed that our dreams are messages from the unconscious. They speak in symbols and metaphors, offering clues about the parts of ourselves we've lost or denied. For Jung, dreams were not random or meaningless. They were guideposts for the soul, ways in which the deeper self tries to reach the conscious mind. This idea opened up a new path in psychology, one that connected science with meaning, emotion with imagination. One of Jung's most powerful insights was the idea that the path to healing is not linear or purely rational. Healing requires going inward, often into painful and confusing places. It involves working with symbols, engaging with imagination, and understanding that some parts of the self will resist being known. Jung saw the inner world as alive, dynamic, mysterious, and deeply personal. To him, each person had a kind of inner compass, and by listening to it, we could move closer to our authentic self. Jung also challenged the idea that we can fix ourselves with quick solutions or surface-level thinking. He believed that modern society has taught us to focus on outer success, career, reputation, appearance, while neglecting the inner life. But when the inner world is ignored, it fights back. Anxiety, depression, addiction, or emptiness often aren't just medical problems. They're signals from the soul that something deeper needs attention. His work gave us a new language to describe inner experience. Shadow, persona, archetype, self, anima, animus. These concepts help us see that the human mind is not simple. It's layered, symbolic, and driven by forces that are both personal and universal. For Jung, true growth begins not when we control the inner world, but when we listen to it, honor it, and work with it. Ultimately, Carl Jung gave us a roadmap to explore what lies beneath the surface of our identity. He taught us that the real answers to our suffering often lie within. Not in changing who we are, but in understanding who we've always been, beneath the fear and conditioning. The inner world isn't just a place of darkness, it's also where we find light, meaning, and transformation. Carl Jung introduced one of the most powerful and unsettling ideas in psychology, the shadow. This is the part of ourselves we don't want to see. It holds everything we deny, suppress, or find unacceptable. Traits like anger, envy, greed, laziness, arrogance, or even deep sadness and vulnerability. According to Jung, everyone has a shadow, and the less we are aware of it, the more control it has over us. The shadow isn't evil by nature. It simply contains the parts of us that have been rejected, usually because they didn't fit into the version of ourselves we were taught to become. From a young age, we learn what's acceptable behavior, what pleases our parents, teachers, and society. We're rewarded for being polite, obedient, kind, and hardworking. But what happens to the parts of us that don't fit those expectations? We push them down, out of sight, into the unconscious. That's where the shadow lives. But hiding parts of ourselves doesn't make them disappear. In fact, the more we repress them, the more they begin to act out in ways we don't understand. Have you ever overreacted to someone and later felt confused by your own behavior? That's often the shadow speaking. Jung believed that the emotions and reactions we can't explain are clues that there's something within us we haven't faced. The most dangerous shadow is the one we refuse to admit exists. That's because it doesn't stay silent. It leaks out through projection, where we see our rejected traits in others. If you're constantly annoyed by someone's arrogance, it may be a sign that you've buried your own pride. If you hate how selfish someone is, it might reflect a part of you that wants more freedom to care for your own needs. The shadow turns our inner world into a mirror, but most of us think we're just reacting to others. Jung also saw the shadow as more than just darkness. It contains energy, potential, and even creativity. Many gifts get buried in the shadow alongside the negative traits. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive or too bold as a child, so you suppressed your emotional depth or your leadership qualities. The shadow stores those parts of you too. That's why facing the shadow isn't just painful, it's also healing. When we accept and integrate what we've denied, we reclaim our wholeness. But the process of meeting the shadow is difficult. It challenges our identity. We like to think of ourselves as good people, and confronting the shadow forces us to see that we are also capable of cruelty, selfishness, or jealousy. That doesn't mean we're bad. It means we're human. Jung believed that growth doesn't come from perfection, but from balance. We grow when we stop pretending and start embracing all aspects of who we are. To meet the shadow, we must cultivate awareness and humility. It might involve honest journaling, therapy, shadow work practices, or even paying close attention to what triggers us emotionally. The key is to approach the shadow with curiosity, not judgment. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" in a harsh way, we ask, "What is this part trying to tell me?" We stop fighting ourselves and start listening. Facing the shadow doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse. It means understanding them. When we do that, the shadow loses its power to control us unconsciously. We begin to respond to life with more awareness and less reactivity. We stop blaming others for the things we haven't resolved within ourselves. In the end, the shadow is not our enemy, it's our teacher. It points us toward what is missing, what is hurting, and what is waiting to be reclaimed. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the path of real self-awareness. When we dare to meet the shadow, we don't become less of who we are. We become more. One of Carl Jung's most essential insights into human psychology is the conflict between the ego and the true self. This inner battle shapes our behavior, decisions, relationships, and even our mental health. The ego is not a bad thing. It's simply the part of us that says, I. It's the conscious mind, the version of ourselves that we identify with every day. Our name, roles, beliefs, habits, and self-image. It helps us function in the world and make sense of who we are. But the problem arises when we think that our ego is our whole self. Jung believed the ego is only a small part of the total psyche. Beneath it lies the unconscious mind, the shadow, the inner child, the archetypes, the forgotten memories, the collective wisdom. All of this makes up the true self, or what Jung called the self with a capital S. The self is the totality of who we are, including the parts we know and the parts we've yet to discover. The ego is like the tip of the iceberg, and the self is everything beneath the surface. The conflict begins because the ego doesn't like change. It wants control, security, and approval. It clings to the identity it has built over time, based on what others have told us we should be. It fears anything unknown or uncomfortable. The true self, however, wants growth. It wants wholeness, and growth often requires going into the unknown, facing pain, breaking old patterns, and letting go of illusions. That's where the ego resists. For example, a person might feel unfulfilled in their career, but stay in the same job because the ego tells them it's safe or successful. Deep down, the true self might be longing for purpose, creativity, or freedom, but following that inner voice would mean risking failure, rejection, or starting over, things the ego avoids at all costs. So the person remains stuck, not because they're lazy or weak, but because the ego is in control. Jung described the ego as being overly attached to the persona, the mask we wear in society to fit in. This mask is shaped by culture, family, religion, and social expectations. Over time, we confuse the mask with our real identity. We think we are the roles we play, but beneath that mask is a more authentic self that often goes unheard. The more tightly we cling to the ego's version of who we are, the more we disconnect from the deeper truth. This disconnect creates inner tension. It shows up as anxiety, depression, frustration, or a vague sense that something is missing. The ego might try to fix this discomfort by achieving more, buying more, or controlling more, but none of those things satisfy the deeper need to live in alignment with the true self. Jung's process of individuation is all about resolving this conflict. Individuation is the path toward integrating all parts of the psyche and becoming who you truly are, not who the ego wants you to be, but who you already are beneath the layers of conditioning. This process doesn't destroy the ego, it puts it in its proper place. The ego becomes a servant to the self, not the ruler. Facing this conflict is uncomfortable because it forces us to ask hard questions. Am I living the life I want or the life others expect of me? Am I being honest about my feelings or am I hiding behind an image? Am I following my inner truth or just trying to avoid failure or judgment? To bridge the gap between the ego and the true self, we must cultivate self-awareness and courage. Meditation, shadow work, dream analysis, deep reflection, and therapy are tools Jung recommended for this inner work. We begin to listen more closely to the quiet voice within, even when it contradicts the loud voice of the ego. In the end, the ego is not the enemy. It's a necessary part of being human. But when it dominates the psyche, it limits our growth and blocks our authenticity. Jung believed that a balanced ego, one that serves rather than controls, allows the self to shine through. And when that happens, we begin to live not from fear or pretense, but from truth and inner freedom. Carl Jung believed one of the most common ways people avoid facing themselves is through projection. This is when we unconsciously take the parts of ourselves that we don't accept, our fears, insecurities, desires, or even strengths, and place them onto others. It's like using the outside world as a mirror, not to see reality, but to see what we've hidden from ourselves. Projection is automatic. We don't realize we're doing it. That's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. For example, a person who has suppressed their own anger might constantly accuse others of being aggressive or rude. Someone who doesn't feel good enough might constantly judge others for being arrogant. A person who secretly longs for freedom might resent people who live boldly. These judgments often reveal more about the one who's judging than the person being judged. Jung explained that projection is a defense mechanism of the ego. The ego wants to protect its identity as good, kind, or rational, so it pushes unwanted traits into the unconscious, into the shadow. But those traits don't disappear. They need expression, and so the unconscious pushes them outward. The mind says, "That's not in me, it's in them." This keeps us from having to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. It creates the illusion that the problem is always outside of us. This mechanism plays a huge role in relationships. Romantic partners, family members, co-workers, and even strangers often become screens onto which we project our unresolved issues. This can cause endless misunderstandings and conflicts. We think we're reacting to them, but we're actually reacting to the parts of ourselves that we see in them. For instance, if someone is deeply annoyed by their partner's emotional needs, it might be because they've rejected their own emotional vulnerability. The outer conflict reflects an inner conflict. Projection is also why many people struggle with criticism. When someone points out a weakness we haven't accepted in ourselves, we often feel defensive or attacked. But if we've already faced and made peace with that part of us, we're less likely to react with anger or shame. In this way, our emotional triggers are clues, guides pointing towards shadow material that hasn't yet been integrated. Jung believed that becoming aware of our projections is a crucial step in individuation. As long as we continue projecting, we remain blind to who we really are. But when we start to recognize that our reactions to others are often reflections of ourselves, we open the door to true self-awareness. We begin to take responsibility for our inner world instead of blaming the outer world. This doesn't mean that all criticism or discomfort comes from projection. Sometimes people genuinely behave in toxic or harmful ways. But even in those situations, Jung would urge us to ask, why does this behavior affect me so deeply? It's not about blaming yourself, it's about learning from your reactions. Projection is not a moral failure, it's a natural process that all humans experience. But left unchecked, it keeps us trapped in cycles of blame, judgment, and denial. Another layer to projection is the way we sometimes project positive traits onto others. We might admire someone's confidence, creativity, or wisdom and think, I could never be like that. But Jung believed that what we admire in others often reflects dormant potential in ourselves. The projection of light is just as important as the projection of shadow. If you're drawn to someone's boldness, maybe it's because your own boldness is waiting to be expressed. The ultimate goal is not to eliminate projection entirely. It's to become conscious of it. When we notice ourselves reacting strongly to someone, positively or negatively, we pause and reflect. What might this say about me? What part of myself have I not accepted? This self-inquiry allows us to withdraw the projection and reclaim what we've disowned. Jung saw this as a path to wholeness. The more we reclaim from our projections, the more we become integrated human beings, less reactive, more compassionate, and deeply self-aware. We begin to see others more clearly, not as distorted mirrors of our own inner conflicts, but as individuals with their own complexity. In the end, projection keeps us asleep. Awareness wakes us up. And in that awakening, we begin to see not just others more clearly, but ourselves. Why are most people afraid to face themselves? According to Carl Jung, it's not because they're weak or unwilling. It's because true self-knowledge is deeply unsettling. To truly know yourself means to dismantle the story you've been telling about who you are. It means looking into the mirror of your psyche and seeing not just the pleasant and polished parts, but the wounded, rejected, and contradictory ones too. This process shakes the foundation of your ego, and for most people, that's terrifying. Jung believed that self-knowledge brings both light and shadow. It forces us to face truths that we've spent our entire lives avoiding. Maybe we have to admit that our motivations aren't as pure as we thought. Maybe we have to confront how much pain we've buried or how much fear has shaped our choices. These revelations are not easy. They break illusions. And the ego resists this because it wants control, safety, and predictability. There's also the fear of what lies beyond the familiar identity. We become attached to certain labels: good person, successful, strong, smart, helpful. Even if those roles are limiting or false, they give us a sense of who we are. Letting them go, even to grow, is a form of psychological death. We're scared of who we might become if we no longer define ourselves by these roles. The unknown feels like chaos, and the ego prefers the prison of the known over the freedom of the unknown. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." This is because self-confrontation often brings emotional pain. It unearths guilt, shame, regret, and vulnerability. To avoid this, people distract themselves with work, entertainment, relationships, social media, addictions, anything that helps them stay on the surface. They may even create elaborate belief systems or narratives just to avoid the raw truth of their inner world. Another reason people fear self-awareness is because it demands responsibility. Once you become aware of your patterns, wounds, and projections, you can no longer blame the world or other people for your suffering. That awareness forces you to take ownership of your healing, and for many, that feels overwhelming. It's easier to stay in victimhood, even if it's painful, because it absolves us of accountability. Jung's concept of the shadow explains a huge part of this fear. The shadow holds everything we don't want to admit about ourselves. To face it means to admit we have the capacity for cruelty, selfishness, envy, or manipulation, traits we'd rather see in others. That honesty can feel like a threat to our moral self-image. But Jung insisted that until we face the shadow, we remain ruled by it. The things we fear within ourselves gain more power the longer we avoid them. Jung also noted that the deeper we go into the unconscious, the more we confront collective layers, not just personal wounds, but universal human fears. These include the fear of meaninglessness, death, isolation, and the unknown. These fears are archetypal. They exist in every culture, every person. Facing them doesn't just shake our personal world. It confronts the human condition itself. But Jung didn't view this confrontation as negative. In fact, he saw it as necessary. Only by going through the fear can we find what's truly real within us. He called this process individuation, becoming whole by integrating every part of the self, not just the pleasant ones. Fear in this journey becomes a guide. It shows us where we are fragmented. It points to the parts of us that are waiting to be healed, understood, and reclaimed. So yes, facing yourself is scary, but Jung believed the real danger lies in not doing it. When we avoid self-awareness, we live on autopilot, controlled by unconscious forces we don't understand. We repeat patterns, sabotage relationships, and feel a persistent sense of emptiness. We may succeed in the world, but feel lost inside. The fear of knowing yourself is natural, but it is also the doorway to transformation. Jung's work teaches us that we do not need to be perfect or fearless to begin this journey. We only need the courage to be honest and the willingness to look within. When we move through the fear instead of avoiding it, we discover a deeper strength, a fuller truth, and a life that is truly our own. Carl Jung emphasized that one of the most powerful reasons people avoid facing themselves is trauma, not always the kind associated with major life events, but often subtle emotional wounds accumulated over time. These wounds shape how we see ourselves, others, and the world. They also shape what parts of ourselves we hide, fear, or disconnect from. Jung didn't use the modern term trauma as we do today, but his theories of the shadow, the unconscious, and repression directly speak to how psychological pain gets buried and how it haunts us when ignored. Trauma creates fragmentation. A child who is rejected, neglected, shamed, or misunderstood doesn't know how to process the pain. The mind protects itself by pushing the pain down into the unconscious. But that pain doesn't disappear. Instead, it becomes part of the shadow, where it influences behavior, emotions, and beliefs in hidden ways. Jung described this as a splitting of the psyche, where parts of the self are exiled because they were too painful to bear. For instance, a child who was constantly criticized might grow up rejecting their need for validation. They might pretend not to care what others think, but deep down, they feel worthless. That feeling gets buried, and the adult becomes overly perfectionistic or emotionally numb. They avoid introspection because deep down, they're afraid of touching that early pain, the original wound. So they keep moving, achieving, distracting. This is what Jung meant when he said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. When we don't deal with the real pain, we create a life full of false coping. Many people assume that facing yourself means thinking about your past, but Jung's work shows that it goes deeper than memory. It's about emotional integration. Traumatized parts of the psyche don't heal just through logic. They require compassion, presence, and symbolic understanding, often through dreams, art, imagination, or therapeutic dialogue. Jung believed that trauma stored in the unconscious can be accessed and healed when we invite it into consciousness, not to judge it, but to understand it. He also believed that trauma often creates inner figures, what he called complexes. These are emotionally charged groups of memories, beliefs, and reactions that form around painful experiences. For example, someone with a mother complex might unconsciously react to authority figures as if they were their disapproving parent. These complexes live in the unconscious and possess us in moments of stress. That's why people say, "I don't know what came over me." Jung believed that until we bring these complexes into awareness, we remain at their mercy. Another powerful effect of trauma is the fear of feeling. Many people unconsciously believe that if they allow themselves to feel sadness, anger, or vulnerability, they will fall apart. So they avoid introspection, not because they're unwilling, but because they've learned to equate emotional honesty with danger. Jung's work invites us to reframe this. Our emotions are not threats, they are messengers. The pain we fear is often the key to our healing, but trauma also disconnects us from the self. The true self isn't damaged by trauma, but our access to it is blocked. The ego builds walls to survive, but those same walls eventually become prisons. We begin to mistake survival strategies for our personality. We might think, I'm just a people pleaser, or I don't get emotional, when in reality, those are defenses formed around wounds. Jung believed that healing requires us to go beneath the surface of identity and listen to what the psyche is really trying to tell us. Trauma also distorts how we see others. When we carry unprocessed pain, we often project it outward. We see threat where there is none. We mistrust kindness. We interpret rejection where there is simply misunderstanding. This keeps us trapped in painful patterns, and the more we repeat these patterns, the more we avoid looking inward, afraid of what we might find. But Jung's vision wasn't hopeless. He believed the psyche has a natural drive toward healing. The unconscious is not just a storage place for pain, it's also a guide. Through dreams, synchronicities, symbols, and inner reflection, it constantly tries to bring unresolved material into consciousness so it can be faced and integrated. Facing trauma is not easy. It takes time, safety, and support. But according to Jung, it's also the path to individuation, to becoming whole. When we stop avoiding the pain and start listening to it, we begin to heal not just the wound, but the false self built around the wound. We no longer live from fear or defense, but from authenticity. Jung's message is clear. Your trauma is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And in taking that responsibility, you reclaim your power not just to survive, but to truly live. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona as the social mask we wear to navigate life. It's the version of ourselves we present to the world, polished, filtered, and acceptable. The persona helps us fit into society. We become the helpful employee, the polite neighbor, the strong parent, the high achiever. It's necessary. We can't function without some form of persona. But Jung warned that many people become trapped in their persona, mistaking it for their true identity. This is a subtle but powerful form of self-avoidance. From childhood, we learn what behaviors are rewarded and which are rejected. If you were praised for being quiet and obedient, your persona may develop around being nice and agreeable. If you were admired for winning, achieving, or being tough, your persona may form around performance and strength. Slowly, you begin to over-identify with this role, while disowning the parts of yourself that don't fit the image. These disowned parts become part of the shadow. The danger arises when people believe their persona is who they are. The kind, smiling person might be hiding deep resentment. The confident leader might feel like a fraud inside. The calm and collected friend may be suppressing waves of anxiety or sadness. The persona becomes a costume we wear for approval, safety, or control. But beneath it lies the unacknowledged truth of who we are. Jung believed that when the persona becomes too rigid, the individual loses touch with the deeper self. Life begins to feel hollow. There may be success, popularity, and recognition, but something vital is missing: authenticity. People may begin to feel depressed, disconnected, or anxious without knowing why. These feelings are signals from the unconscious, warning us that we've lost contact with the inner world. The persona also serves as a defense mechanism. It shields us from rejection and judgment. If you appear perfect, no one will see your insecurity. If you act strong, no one will see your pain. But the cost of maintaining this mask is enormous. It drains energy, isolates us emotionally, and keeps us from real intimacy. After all, how can you be truly loved if no one sees the real you? Jung pointed out that society often rewards the persona. Social media, workplace cultures, and even family dynamics often encourage image over substance. We're praised for being composed, successful, and likable, but rarely for being real. This creates enormous pressure to perform rather than to live. As a result, many people go through life disconnected from their true desires, emotions, and even values, all in the name of fitting in. But the persona isn't evil, it has a role. Problems arise when we become identified with it, when we believe we are the role and forget that it's only a part of us. Jung urged people to become aware of their personas and question them. Why do I feel the need to appear this way? What am I afraid people will see if I take the mask off? What part of myself have I sacrificed to maintain this image? Peeling back the persona is frightening. It means risking disapproval. It means admitting that you don't have it all together. But it also opens the door to true connection with yourself and others. When you allow yourself to be seen, not just as your persona, but as a full human being, you create space for honesty, healing, and self-discovery. This process is deeply connected to Jung's idea of individuation, becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, not just the ones society approves of. Dropping the persona doesn't mean becoming raw or impulsive all the time. It means no longer hiding behind an identity that feels false. It means becoming conscious of the mask, choosing when to wear it, and knowing who you are underneath. Ultimately, the persona is not the enemy, but it is a barrier if we forget it's just a surface. Jung believed that to live fully, we must go beyond appearances and face the messy, beautiful, complex truth of who we are. Only then can we stop performing life and start living it. Carl Jung taught that one of the biggest obstacles to facing ourselves honestly is the resistance built into our own minds, specifically the resistance of the ego. The ego is the part of our psyche that creates our conscious identity, the I that navigates daily life. While essential for functioning, the ego also fiercely defends its sense of self from anything that threatens its stability. This defense often shows up as resistance to self-awareness. Resistance is subtle, yet powerful. It can take many forms: procrastination, distraction, rationalization, denial, or even outright rebellion against introspection. When you try to look inside, to explore your true feelings, or confront painful truths, a part of you may push back. This is the ego's way of protecting itself from perceived danger. The ego wants to stay comfortable, safe, and in control, and self-awareness can feel like chaos or collapse. Jung believed this resistance is normal and necessary to some degree. The ego's primary job is survival. It protects us from psychological overwhelm by keeping difficult material unconscious. But problems arise when resistance becomes rigid and habitual. When we constantly avoid or suppress uncomfortable truths, the ego grows more defensive and fragile. We become stuck in repetitive patterns, unable to grow or heal. One common form of resistance is intellectualizing feelings. Instead of sitting with discomfort, people analyze or distract themselves with thoughts. For example, someone might think endlessly about why they feel anxious without allowing themselves to feel the anxiety itself. This creates a barrier between the conscious mind and the emotional experience beneath. Jung said that emotions need to be felt, not just understood intellectually. Resistance keeps emotions locked away, preventing healing. Another form is projection, which we discussed earlier, where the ego pushes unwanted traits into others. This allows the ego to avoid accepting parts of the self that are painful or unacceptable. Instead of looking inward, the ego looks outward and blames others for problems. This maintains the ego's illusion of control and goodness. Resistance can also show up as fear of change. Self-awareness often leads to transformation, which means leaving behind old habits, identities, and comfort zones. Even if these old patterns cause suffering, the ego clings to them because they're familiar. Change feels like losing control, so the ego resists growth to preserve itself. Jung likened this struggle to a battle within the psyche, the ego trying to maintain order while the unconscious pushes for integration and wholeness. Resistance is the ego's last stand, but Jung also believed that the ego must eventually yield for growth to occur. The key is awareness of resistance itself. When you notice you're avoiding certain feelings, topics, or insights, that is an invitation to gently explore what's behind the resistance. Self-awareness is not about forcing yourself to feel or think things you're not ready for. It's about recognizing the defense and allowing it space without judgment. When resistance is met with patience and curiosity, it softens. The ego learns that facing the shadow isn't a threat, but a path to strength. Jung emphasized that this process requires courage and compassion. The ego is not the enemy. It's a part of you trying to keep you safe in the best way it knows. But growth means teaching the ego to trust that vulnerability doesn't equal danger. It means helping the ego understand that true security comes from wholeness, not denial. In practical terms, working through resistance often means small, consistent steps toward self-reflection through journaling, therapy, meditation, or simply pausing to notice your reactions. It means accepting discomfort as a natural part of growth. Jung believed that when the ego gradually loosens its grip, we open ourselves to a richer, deeper experience of life. Ultimately, resistance to self-awareness is the ego's protective armor. But when we recognize it, we can begin to gently remove the armor and meet ourselves with honesty. This is where true healing and transformation begin, when the ego stops fighting itself and learns to cooperate with the deeper parts of the psyche. Projection is one of Carl Jung's most important concepts when it comes to understanding why people avoid facing themselves. It's a psychological defense mechanism where we unconsciously attribute our own unwanted thoughts, feelings, or traits onto others. Instead of acknowledging these parts within ourselves, we project them outward, seeing them as existing in other people. This process protects the ego by keeping difficult or unacceptable aspects of ourselves hidden. For example, if someone feels anger or jealousy but believes these emotions are wrong or shameful, they might accuse others of being angry or jealous instead. Or a person who fears their own selfishness might constantly label others as selfish. In this way, projection distorts reality and creates a barrier between us and our true selves. Jung taught that projection is a natural part of the psyche, especially in the early stages of self-awareness. Everyone does it to some extent, because no one wants to look at their flaws or dark feelings directly. It's painful and threatening to the ego's sense of control. Projection is like a psychological mirror that reflects parts of us onto the outside world. But the reflection is misleading. We think we're seeing reality, but we're actually seeing ourselves disguised as others. This process helps explain many human conflicts and misunderstandings. When people project their fears, insecurities, or judgments onto others, it fuels blame, criticism, and division. We often become caught in cycles where we attack others for the very things we refuse to see in ourselves. Projection makes self-awareness difficult because it keeps these parts outside, beyond our conscious grasp. The key problem with projection is that it prevents integration. Jung believed that growth and healing require us to reclaim these projected parts and bring them back into consciousness. This means recognizing that the qualities we dislike or fear in others exist within us too, and that's okay. The parts of ourselves we reject are often the ones that need our compassion and understanding the most. Jung saw projection as a kind of unconscious communication between the conscious ego and the deeper unconscious. When we project, the unconscious is trying to reveal something about ourselves, but the ego refuses to see it. Bringing projection into awareness is like pulling back a curtain. We begin to notice how we react to certain people or situations and ask, what is this showing me about myself? This process is not about blaming yourself or feeling guilt. It's about honest curiosity. For example, if you feel irritated by someone's arrogance, instead of condemning them, ask yourself if there's a part of you that struggles with pride or insecurity. If you feel jealous of a friend's success, explore your own feelings of inadequacy or desire. By doing this, you transform projection from a defense into a tool for self-discovery. Jung also linked projection to the shadow. The parts we project are often those buried deep in our shadow because they are unacceptable to our conscious self-image. Shadow work, the process of exploring and integrating these hidden parts, requires facing projection head-on. It's uncomfortable, but liberating. Over time, as projection decreases, relationships improve. We stop blaming others and start taking responsibility for our feelings and reactions. We become less reactive and more reflective. This not only deepens self-awareness but also fosters empathy and compassion for others. We see them not as enemies or threats, but as mirrors reflecting our own human complexity. In summary, projection is a powerful mechanism that protects us from facing uncomfortable truths, but also traps us in illusions. Carl Jung's insight was that by recognizing and owning our projections, we open the door to genuine self-knowledge. The journey to face ourselves begins when we stop blaming the world and start looking inward, seeing the parts we once denied and welcoming them home. Carl Jung described individuation as the lifelong process of becoming the fullest version of ourselves, integrating all parts of our psyche, including those we've avoided or rejected. This journey is at the heart of why most people fear facing themselves. It requires courage to look beyond the surface and embrace both light and shadow, strengths and weaknesses, conscious and unconscious. Individuation is not about achieving perfection or a fixed identity. Instead, it's about wholeness, acknowledging every aspect of who we are and learning to live in harmony with ourselves. Jung saw the psyche as composed of many parts: the ego, our conscious identity; the shadow, hidden or denied aspects; the anima, animus, inner feminine or masculine qualities; and the self, which represents the totality and unity of the psyche. The ego tends to resist individuation because it fears losing control or facing the discomfort of change. It clings to familiar roles and identities, avoiding the unknown within. Yet, without this process, the ego remains incomplete and vulnerable to neurosis, confusion, and inner conflict. Individuation begins with self-awareness, the willingness to observe one's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without judgment. It means recognizing our shadows and understanding that they are not enemies, but parts of ourselves that hold valuable insights and energy. For example, anger might reveal boundaries that need protecting. Sadness might point to unmet needs. Throughout the journey, dreams, symbols, and imagination become powerful guides. Jung believed the unconscious communicates through images and stories, helping us understand hidden parts of ourselves. Paying attention to these messages enriches our understanding and supports healing. Individuation also involves balancing opposites within us. We all carry conflicting traits: strength and vulnerability, independence and connection, logic and intuition. The process invites us to honor these tensions instead of denying one side. This balance leads to greater flexibility, creativity, and resilience. Importantly, individuation is deeply personal. No two paths are the same because each person's psyche is unique. Jung warned against copying others or trying to fit a fixed mold. Instead, he encouraged authenticity, living in alignment with one's true nature. The journey is often challenging. It may stir fears, grief, or confusion as old patterns break down, but it also offers profound rewards, a sense of inner peace, deeper relationships, and a clearer sense of purpose. As we integrate more of ourselves, we become less reactive to external pressures and more centered in who we are. Jung saw individuation as essential not only for individuals but for society. When people avoid themselves, they project their inner conflicts outward, fueling division and misunderstanding. Individuated individuals, on the other hand, bring wholeness and healing to their communities. Ultimately, individuation is about reclaiming the self, the core of our being that connects us to life's deeper meaning. It's a journey from fragmentation to unity, from fear to acceptance, and from avoidance to embrace. Though it requires facing fears and shadows, it leads to a fuller, richer experience of being human. In essence, Jung's theory of individuation teaches us that the path to freedom and fulfillment lies in courageously facing ourselves, both the parts we love and those we fear, and welcoming them all as essential pieces of our unique whole. Facing ourselves, the raw, hidden parts of our psyche, is one of the bravest things a person can do. Carl Jung understood that most people are afraid to look inward because it feels like entering unknown territory filled with shadows, fears, and unresolved pain. But he also believed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it, finding that courage is the gateway to healing and wholeness. The first step toward courage is awareness. Simply noticing when you are avoiding or denying parts of yourself opens a door. It might show up as distraction, defensiveness, or discomfort. Instead of pushing these feelings away, Jung suggested gently turning toward them with curiosity. This creates a safe space inside where healing can begin. Next is acceptance. Facing yourself requires admitting that you are imperfect, vulnerable, and sometimes contradictory. This can be scary because it challenges the ego's idealized image. But Jung taught that acceptance, especially self-compassion, is essential. It allows you to hold difficult emotions without judgment and recognize that these parts are natural aspects of being human. Jung also emphasized the importance of patience. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. The psyche unfolds at its own pace. Sometimes progress feels slow or even regressive. Trusting the process and being kind to yourself during setbacks is crucial. Another vital step is seeking support. Courage doesn't mean facing everything alone. Jung believed that relationships, whether with therapists, friends, or mentors, can hold a mirror to ourselves and provide guidance. Talking through feelings and experiences can help us make sense of what the unconscious is revealing. Jung encouraged using creative expression as a way to face inner material safely. Art, writing, music, or dream work can give voice to hidden parts and provide symbolic insights. These practices allow the unconscious to communicate in non-threatening ways. Importantly, courage includes setting boundaries. Facing yourself doesn't mean accepting harm or negativity from others. It means learning to protect your inner space so you can explore without fear of external disruption. As you build courage, you start noticing patterns that once controlled you, defenses, projections, or avoidance, and you choose differently. You become an active participant in your own healing rather than a passive victim of circumstance. Jung's ultimate message is hopeful. While facing the self is difficult, it is also deeply rewarding. The courage to face our shadows leads to greater authenticity, freedom, and peace. It allows us to live more fully and connect more deeply with ourselves and others. In the end, the journey to courage is itself a process of individuation, becoming whole by embracing all parts of who we are. Each small act of honesty, acceptance, and compassion is a victory over fear and avoidance. And with every step forward we move closer to the profound healing that Carl Jung believed was possible for everyone willing to face the truth within.